Hi, I figured I could make a walkthrough on how to implement Azure Active Directory and Optimizely CMS. There are quite a few guides out there, but none that really covers all the parts. So we're going to begin with having a look at the official documentation, and then I'm going to head over to a version that I made and put into my GitHub repo. And we're going to end up on how to set up the actual client in Azure Active Directory itself. So as I mentioned in the official documentation, you can search for integrate Azure AD using OpenID Connect and in the docs.developers.automizely.com, and it points out a few obvious facts here, which some information about Azure Active Directory, some prerequisites. You should install this package, which is correct. And then there is their OpenID Connect implementation. I have some opinions about it. We're gonna walk through mine. I'm just gonna point out the exact differences between them, but there are a thing or two that I like to do instead of using this sort of pattern or this implementation, so to speak. They're not that different. I base my implementation pretty much on this, and this is a pretty standard implementation of using of integrating to Azure Active Directory. So in my GitHub repo, which is github.com/ericardits, you can find this Optimizely CMS 12 Azure AD, and everything you should need is here to get started. So this is an empty CMS site. It has nothing else but the CMS GUI and the integration to Active Directory in it for Azure Active Directory. So we're gonna head over to my repos folder, do a git clone. Okay. So there are a few noteworthy files in this project. There is the app settings, of course. There's the manifest, which I've implemented to make this work in Azure with Azure Active Directory. You're going to you may copy the contents of this file into your own implementations. I'll show you how. And there's their startup file. The app settings contains, I also included the database for you to get started. So this is just a standard Active Directory, a standard app setting. I've implemented the settings for the client ID, the secret, and the tenant ID, which I'm going to show you how to create. Those values are going to come from Azure Active Directory. The startup file is the implementation, which is kind of similar to the one that Optimizely ships. I've changed some things to defaults here, and we're going to walk this through this when we have the integration set up. But basically it's pretty much the same. I've added a debug event here, in which we can look at the claims and explain those. Also, if we have a look at the Optimizely implementation, they use a claim type role and the preferred username here. Those may and must be configured. If I were to take this claim in here, that is actually just a reference to the namespace that Microsoft usually use for role claims. Now this may or may not be useful for you. We're gonna have a look at that, and I'm gonna show you how to figure out which one you should use. It depends on how your Azure is set up, I suppose, and well, Microsoft actually changed that sometimes in how these claims come out of your Active Directory. So we're gonna have a look at that anyway, and I'm gonna show you how to choose which properties to use here, which values that is correct. Running this project now would don't make sense because we don't have an app for that, or app registration, that is. And app registration in Azure Active Directory is actually just an authorization scheme. manifest to integrate towards different Azure services. So when you set this up an app in Azure Active Directory, you can make a lot more things with than just integrating with the Active Directory. So in order to set up an app in Active Directory or Azure AD, you're gonna head over to Azure Active Directory, and there's this long list, and you're gonna find it Azure Active Directory in the left menu bar, or you can search, and there's this menu called menu blade called App Registration. There is Enterprise registrations as well. I think there is Microsoft.com. Yes, there it is. So there's a simplified GUI for handling this, which you may or may not get access to. But you can do the exact same here, like app registration, and work from there. I am used to sitting in Azure as it is, so I'm going to use this, but the menu and everything is the same. Now, what we're going to do here is go to app registrations. We're going to add a new registration, and well, let's call this CMS 12 demo. I'm going to make the single tenant, which means that accounts in this organization directory only, which is the normal thing to do, I suppose. We're going to leave everything of this empty other than that. So we just want to register this app, because the rest of many of these settings will be configured when uploading the manifest. Now, in the project, there is this manifest file that I've included, and we have a few things here that I pointed out that should be replaced in this file. So we have the ID, the app ID. We'll start with the ID. Copy that. And then we have the app ID. And the next property should be publisher domain. I'll find publisher domain here, which is my domain. Herdis.nu. Nu in Swedish, it means now, so that's a very popular domain name in Sweden. And the last one was name. It should have been CMS12 demo. Right. Like so, I can copy and paste that into here, and preferably save it as well. All right, so I'm gonna need to remove those comments in order for Azure to allow me to save this manifest. Save. And so now this you won't change, but if we have a look into authentication, there should be some properties added. I've added in the manifest is added the default redirect URIs. When you deploy this solution with OpenID, you're going to need to point out every possible redirect URI. So that would include any development URL, the dev test, pre-prod, and production URLs, and so on. And the sign-in OIDC is the standard port that the OpenID Connect middleware actually injects. So if you talk back to that endpoint, OpenID know what to do with this. And this is an authoritative call from an OpenID server. It points out ID tokens. If you're going to use it for implicit flows, you're going to need to change this, but this would be a typical standard setup for use integrating the Azure AD with Optimizely. There are some token configuration here, like groups, which I should be able to edit. So some standard settings, we emit groups as role claims and using the SAM account names, otherwise we're just going to get GUIDs. We're going to need to set up a secret. And this is quite important, so we do demo secret. Let's use 6 months and add. And this value, it will only be visible at this time. So you're gonna take that, you're gonna copy that, put that in your password manager, set the expiry on that, so you have track on, because in April in 2023 this secret will expire. And I'm gonna paste that into my secret here. The client ID is something that you can fetch from the overview. There's an application ID, that would be the client ID. In Azure language, application ID, this is called application ID, but in OpenID language, it's called client ID. We do also have the directory tenant ID, which is the GUID to my AD, or Azure Active Directory, or the tenant, so to speak. I believe that should be it. We can have a look again at the manifest, and we're going to see that it has done some modifications to it. We do have the password credentials, which is the secret we created. And other than that, I think that's it. Some note where these things that I've made here is I've added security group here. This group membership claims can be modified. There's distribution groups, you can write all, but if you have a big Active Directory, or if you sort of don't get all the claims that you want from this endpoint, this is one of the properties you're going to need to modify. Now, if I were to run this, I would assume that it will work. So I'm just going to run it, see if we can log in. Oh, this is the first time I'm running this project now since I cloned it, so it's going to need to pull all the packages from NuGet. But it should be pretty quick. So, should be available in this URL. So this is because I forgot to do something. And you may allow one to have this dialog. I do not wish to have it. So what I did forgot to do was in the app registration of my CMS 12 demo here, there's this API permissions. These are some areas of Microsoft Graph that we or the manifest is set up to allow access to. This is actually quite important place of this in this app registration, but it explains or it describes which areas of Azure that you actually granted this app access to. Now, since we have delegated access, this would mean that the user will need to allow the app to access these different resources. If we click admin consent, the admin grants these rights for you in an automated way. So if we were to go to localhost server CMS, these grants should have been made for you, so to speak, so you don't need to actually allow them for yourself. So I am actually logged in here as my Active Directory user, which is that's pretty much everything you need. So obviously the role mapping and everything worked. We're gonna have a look at this though. Just gonna stop this side here, and if we are to look at the manifest file, here is a part which on token validity, which means this is an event in the startup file where we can actually start having a look at what's happening. And this is a pretty simple way to do it, because I'm just gonna write out the claims in the console. I think it makes for a pretty good demo. So we're gonna run this. I am going to delete my cookies. Like so. Try to open this again, and I'm hopefully going to be single signed on. I don't get any login prompt because I'm already signed in Azure, so that's why I don't get to log in. If I log out of Azure, I'm going to need to log into here once again. So if we have a look in the console, we should see these are the claims that I wrote out in the console. We can see the preferred username, we can see my name and my email and everything, and my roles. Now these, depending on how your directory is set up and what version of Active Directory you use and so on, the role type, this is the role value and this is the role type, these may change or vary. In some directories it's going to be the path that was or the value that was set up in the official documentation. But if you use the free version of Active Directory, which I do in this demo, it's not going to be there either. So anyway, the most important things to point out that I've changed in this implementation from the standard implementation, so to speak, from Optimizely, is that I use the standard authentication scheme, which is cookies. Now that can be somewhat troublesome sometimes, actually change that to something else than that. There are plenty of ways to build this in many different ways in order to use sort of different authentication providers and everything, or multiple OpenID Connect servers. I'm not going to walk through this in this video, but I may do that in future. Also, an event here in the cookie section is when the cookie is written to your device or your browser. This on signed in event will use the synchronization service, which is synchronized async. It sort of synchronizes your claims identity to the local store in Optimizely or the CMS, because it needs a copy of your user or the profile. I mean, the Active Directory will only actually authenticate your user. You don't use the profile in that way through Optimizely. So the claims identity is written to Optimizely in order to be used into the internal services in CMS or Commerce, for that matter, whatever service you use. So in this scheme here, this is where the cookie becomes important, because so it's know where it's going to go to have a look at the information. The cookie is also registered here. Here we have the sign-in of IDC, which is the callback path, which you set up in the manifest or in the app registration here. Pointed out that here is this sign-in OIDC, and I would recommend on leaving it that way, at least if you're using a single provider, like we do here. Here are some scopes. I believe I modified this from the original a bit. No, it seems to be the same. OpenID offline access, email. Yep. No, this is changed. They only use OpenID. I recommend using OpenID profile. So the scopes is something that will affect the number of claims you get you will retrieve from Azure Active Directory. And this claims in this context would be the difference between having sort of roles or name. I believe that I didn't get a proper name from my Active Directory in only using the OpenID scope, so I had to use OpenID profile. This is just strings in a way, so if you have your custom scope, you can add that. Just add as many as you like. Offline access is not required to make this work, but it's a great way to make refresh tokens work. Map inbound claims, yes, they should be mapped. The token validation parameter, this is the one that actually may be most important to set that correctly here. Like I mentioned earlier, there are some standards here. There are claim types, and this would be role. In a more enterprise scenario, this would be role, and that is just a schema or the type that is used to connect to or to explain where to look for the role claims shipped by the directory. And there are also JOT claim types if you have, which is, I don't have that library implemented, but that is also very common. This may also in some scenarios be preferred name. In my directory setup, that would be have been my email address. I do not want that. There are some events here. There's a redirect loop protections that Optimizely will send as a standard. Authentication fail. This will sort of interrupt any request and just write out the exception message. So this is something you would like to change in a scenario. You would probably like to log the event and send the user to a 500 error page or something like that. This is the event that I've added just to write out the claims in the console, and that is actually the entire implementation. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it. Please feel free to like and comment if you have any questions. I'm available for questions on Twitter and also on the Optimizely Slack community. If you're not a member there, I recommend you to go there. It's a pretty good way to get support and have your questions answered. And I wish you a good day.